They called her the Invisible Woman. For 10 years, Elena sat quietly in the back of the room, enduring the insults of her billionaire husband's children. They called her a gold digger. They called her the Help. They thought that when Arthur died, she would be on the street with nothing but the clothes on her back. They were wrong. Dead wrong. When the most expensive lawyer in Manhattan opened the leather-bound folder, he didn't ask Elena to leave. He asked the children to sit down and shut up, because the woman they ignored wasn't just the wife. She was the owner of the very chairs they were sitting on, and the secret she was about to reveal would cost them everything. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. It was a miserable grey Tuesday when they lowered Arthur Sterling into the wet earth of the family plot at Lakeview Cemetery. Elena Sterling stood at the edge of the grave, the mud threatening to ruin her modest black heels. She held a simple black umbrella, her knuckles white against the handle. She stood alone. 10 feet away, under a sprawling, heated canopy tent reserved for the immediate family, stood Arthur's children from his first marriage, Julian and Victoria. Julian, 35, and wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than Elena's first car, looked bored. He checked his Rolex repeatedly, tapping the face of the watch as if to speed up the priest's eulogy. Beside him, Victoria, 3 years younger and drowning in vintage Chanel, was sobbing theatrically into a lace handkerchief. Eleanor knew for a fact that the handkerchief was dry. Victoria had spent the last week arguing with the hospice nurses about the morphine drip, terrified her father would spend her inheritance on pain management. And so, the priest intoned, his voice fighting the wind, we say goodbye to a titan of industry, a father, a husband. At the word husband, Julian scoffed audibly. He turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Eleanor. The sneer was practiced, sharp, and intended to cut. He leaned over to his sister, whispering loud enough for the wind to carry the words to Eleanor. Look at her, Julian hissed, standing there like a lost puppy. I bet she's calculating how quickly she can pawn the wedding ring. Victoria giggled, a harsh sound like glass breaking. She better enjoy the view. By Friday, the locks on the manor will be changed. I've already called the security firm. Elena didn't react. She didn't flinch. She simply stared at the mahogany casket. Let them talk, she thought. Let them think I am weak. For 7 years, Elena had been Arthur's wife. She had been 30 when she married the 60-year-old CEO of Sterling Maritime, a global shipping logistics empire worth billions. The press had eaten it up, the titan and the secretary. They painted her as the opportunist who snagged the lonely old man. Julian and Victoria had made her life a living hell, treating her like a trespasser in their ancestral home. They excluded her from family holidays, mocked her background in front of the servants, and constantly referred to her as the mistake. But Elena knew something they didn't. She knew Arthur. Arthur hadn't married her for her beauty, though she was striking. He married her because she was the only person in the room who actually listened to him. He married her because, late at night, when the pain of his illness kept him awake, she was the one discussing the Asian market expansion strategies with him, not the nurses, and certainly not his children who were busy partying in Ibiza or losing millions in Vegas. The funeral service ended. The crowd began to disperse, a sea of black umbrellas moving toward the line of limousines. Elena folded her umbrella. She walked toward the lead limousine, the one designated for the widow. As she reached for the handle, a hand slammed against the door, holding it shut. It was Julian. Up close, he smelled of expensive scotch and entitlement. "Wrong car, Elena," he said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. This is for family." Elena looked up at him, her face calm. "I am his wife, Julian." "You were his nurse with a ring," Victoria chimed in, stepping up beside her brother. She looked Elena up and down with distaste. "And the show is over. You can take an Uber back to the estate to pack your things. The reading of the will is at 4:15 p.m. Don't be late. We want to get this over with so we can fumigate the house." The driver, a man named Henderson, who had driven Arthur for 20 years, looked uncomfortable. He liked Elena. She had always remembered his daughter's birthday. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson started. "Mrs. Sterling is supposed to—" "Shut up, Henderson," Julian snapped. "Unless you want to be unemployed by sunset, you'll drive us. Let the gold digger walk." Julian opened the door, ushered Victoria inside, and slid in after her. The heavy door slammed shut, splashing mud onto Elena's shin. Elena watched the limousine pull away, the taillights fading into the mist. She took a deep breath of the cold air. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket and dialed a number. "Mrs. Sterling," a voice answered on the first ring. It was calm, precise, and professional. "I'm ready, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said softly. "They left me at the cemetery." "I expected as much," the voice replied. "The car is around the corner. We have much to discuss before 4:15 p.m. "Do they know you're the executor?" Elena asked. "No," the lawyer replied. "They think it's their father's old corporate attorney, the one Julian plays golf with. They are in for a significant shock." "Good," Elena said, her eyes hardening as she looked at the fresh dirt on the grave. "Let's go." The Sterling estate sat on the cliffs overlooking Puget Sound, a sprawling masterpiece of stone and glass that screamed old money. The driveway was filled with luxury cars, Porsches, Bentleys, and the Aston Martin Julian had bought himself last week on credit, anticipating his windfall. Inside, the great library was tense. The room was lined with first edition books that neither Julian nor Victoria had ever read. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth, but it did little to warm the atmosphere. Julian sat at the head of the long mahogany table, swirling a glass of crystal-clear vodka. Victoria sat to his right, scrolling through Zillow on her iPad. "I'm thinking we list the house immediately," Victoria said, not looking up. "The market is hot. We can get at least 15 million for the property alone. I don't want to deal with the staff." "Keep the staff for a month," Julian countered, loosening his tie. "I need someone to cater the victory party this weekend. Then we fire them. Especially Henderson. He's too loyal to her." Speaking of her, Victoria glanced at the grandfather clock. It was 3:55 p.m. "Do you think she's actually going to show up? It would be smarter if she just ran." "She'll come," Julian laughed darkly. "She's probably hoping Dad left her the cat or maybe a used Toyota. She's pathetic." At that moment, the heavy oak doors creaked open. The siblings looked up, expecting to see a disheveled, rain-soaked Elena. Instead, the woman who walked in looked like she had just stepped off a runway in Milan. Elena had changed. Gone was the shapeless black dress from the funeral. She wore a tailored, sharp charcoal suit that hugged her frame with commanding precision. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant bun. Her lips were painted a deep blood red. She walked into the room not with the hesitation of a grieving widow, but with the stride of a CEO entering a boardroom. Behind her walked a man neither Julian nor Victoria recognized. He was tall, silver-haired, carrying a thick briefcase and wearing a suit that made Julian's look cheap. "You're late," Julian barked, trying to regain the dominance he felt slipping away. "And who the hell is this? Where is Mr. Henderson? Where is the family attorney?" Elena ignored him. She walked to the opposite end of the table, directly facing Julian, and sat down. She didn't slump, She reigned. The silver-haired man placed his briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked at the siblings with a mixture of pity and steel. "Mr. Henderson retired 3 weeks ago," the man said, his voice a deep baritone that demanded silence. "My name is Alistair Blackwood. I am a senior partner at Blackwood, Stone and Croft. I drafted Arthur Sterling's final will and testament 6 months ago." Julian went pale. "Blackwood? That's a corporate litigation firm. Dad used the family firm. You're lying." "Your father made many changes in his final months, Julian," Elena said. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremble they were used to. He realized that the people handling his affairs lacked vision. "You shut your mouth," Victoria hissed, slamming her hand on the table. "You don't speak here. You're lucky we're letting you sit inside." "Miss Sterling," Mr. Blackwood cut in sharply, "I would advise you to remain silent until the proceedings are concluded. Any outbursts can be interpreted as contesting the will, which, under Clause 14b, would result in immediate forfeiture of any potential inheritance." The room went deathly silent. Victoria's mouth snapped shut. Immediate forfeiture. The threat hung in the air like smoke. "Good," Blackwood said, opening the briefcase. He pulled out a thick document, sealed with red wax. He broke the seal with a distinct crack that echoed in the library. "Let us begin," Blackwood said. "This is the last will and testament of Arthur James Sterling, being of sound mind and body." He read through the preamble. Julian poured himself another drink, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't like this lawyer. He didn't like the way Elena was looking at him, like a predator watching a wounded deer. "Article 1, Blackwood read. "To my loyal staff." He listed generous sums. Henderson the driver received $100,000. The housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, received the same. The gardener, the cook. Arthur had been generous. Julian rolled his eyes. "Great. Spending my money on the help. Can we skip to the assets, the company, the accounts?" "Patience, Mr. Sterling," Blackwood said coldly. "Article 2, Personal Effects. To my daughter Victoria." Victoria sat up straighter, a greedy smile forming. "I leave my collection of antique jewelry, specifically the emerald collection belonging to her late mother. I also leave the vacation home in Aspen, Colorado, on the condition that it is not sold for a period of 10 years. Victoria frowned. "Wait, I can't sell it? But the upkeep is a fortune." "That is the condition," Blackwood stated. "Do you accept?" "Fine," she huffed. "Whatever. The jewelry is worth millions." "To my son, Julian." Julian leaned forward, his knuckles gripping the table. "I leave my vintage car collection, currently housed in the East Garage. I also leave the sum of $500,000. Julian blinked. He froze. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 500,000? Julian stammered. He laughed nervously. "You missed a few zeros. Dad was worth $4 billion. 500,000 is... It's a joke. That doesn't even cover my debts." "The text is clear," Blackwood said. "Where is the rest?" Julian screamed, standing up and knocking his chair over. "The shipping company, Sterling Maritime, the stocks, the offshore accounts. Who gets the empire?" Blackwood looked up from the paper. He took off his glasses and polished them slowly. "Please sit down, Mr. Sterling. We are getting to Article 3, the residual estate and control of Sterling Maritime." Julian sat, his face red, sweat beading on his forehead. "Read it," he snarled. Blackwood looked at Eleanor. She gave him a barely perceptible nod. "Article 3, Blackwood read, his voice ringing with authority. "I, Arthur Sterling, being aware of the distinct lack of business acumen, moral character, and work ethic displayed by my children, do hereby bypass them, entirely regarding the ownership of Sterling Maritime. What? Victoria gasped. Regarding the controlling interest in Sterling Maritime, comprising 51% of all voting shares and the ownership of the Sterling estate, and all liquid assets not previously mentioned. Blackwood paused. He looked directly at Julian. I leave everything, in its entirety, to the only person who helped me build this company back from the brink of bankruptcy 5 years ago. My partner in life and in business. My sole beneficiary, Mrs. Elena Sterling. The gasp that came from Victoria was so loud it sounded like she had been punched in the gut. Julian stared at Eleanor. His brain couldn't process the words. No, he whispered. That's impossible. She's a secretary. She's a nobody. Eleanor slowly stood up. She placed her hands flat on the table and leaned toward Julian. Actually, Julian, Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice of the person who had been secretly running the company from Arthur's bedside for 2 years. I'm the chairman of the board, and you're sitting in my chair. The silence in the great library was shattered by the sound of glass striking stone. Julian had hurled his heavy crystal tumbler against the fireplace, sending shards and vodka spraying across the hearth. You are a liar! Julian screamed, his face turning a mottled shade of purple. He pointed a trembling finger at Mr. Blackwood. You forged this. My father would never leave his legacy to a domestic servant. She changed his bedpans. She didn't run his company. Elena remained seated, her expression unreadable. She slowly picked up a heavy fountain pen from the table, Arthur's favorite pen, and twirled it between her fingers. Sit down, Julian, Elena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a terrifying weight. You are embarrassing yourself. I'm not going anywhere. Julian lunged toward the table, grabbing the will. I'm tearing this trash up. I'm calling the police. You manipulated a dying man. That's undue influence. That's fraud. Actually, Mr. Blackwood interjected calmly, stepping between Julian and Eleanor. Arthur anticipated this reaction. If you look at the screen behind you, Blackwood pressed a button on a small remote. The large oil painting of Arthur Sterling that hung above the fireplace slowly slid aside, revealing a built-in flat-screen television. The screen flickered to life. It was a video recording. Arthur Sterling sat in his hospital bed, looking frail and hooked up to monitors, but his eyes were sharp. He held a newspaper dated 3 days before his death to prove the timeline. Hello, Julian. Hello, Victoria. The video Arthur rasped. Victoria gasped, covering her mouth. Julian froze, staring at the ghost of his father. If you are watching this, Arthur continued, it means you have thrown a tantrum. It means you are threatening Elena. It means you haven't changed. Arthur paused to cough, a wet, rattling sound. I want to be clear. I am of sound mind. I am leaving everything to Elena, because she is the only one who didn't ask for it. While you two were charging vacations to the company account, Elena was reading the quarterly reports to me. While you were waiting for me to die, she was trying to keep me alive. She knows the business, Julian, better than you ever did. She is the shark I never could teach you to be. Arthur leaned into the camera, his eyes hard. Do not fight her. If you contest this will, I have instructed Mr. Blackwood to release the red files to the IRS and the district attorney. You know what I'm talking about, Julian. The offshore gambling debts, the embezzled funds from the Hong Kong expansion. I covered for you because you are my son. But if you attack my wife, I will destroy you from the grave. The screen went black. The painting slid back into place. The room was so quiet you could hear the rain lashing against the windows. Julian looked like he was about to vomit. The red files. He slumped into his chair, defeated. He knew exactly what was in those files. Prison time. Now, Elena said, standing up and smoothing her suit jacket. We have business to attend to. Mr. Blackwood has the transfer papers. But first, there is the matter of your living arrangements. Victoria looked up, eyes wide with panic. What? You can't kick us out. This is our childhood home. It was, Elena corrected. Now it is my house, and I don't like house guests who insult the hostess. Elena checked her watch. It is 4:20 p.m. You have until 6:00 p.m. to remove your personal belongings. Anything left after that time will be donated to charity. 2 hours? Victoria shrieked. That's impossible. I have an entire wardrobe. I have furniture. Take what you can carry, Elena said coldly. Leave the furniture. That belongs to the estate. And leave the keys to the Aston Martin, Julian. It's part of the collection now. You can't do this, Julian whispered, his voice broken. Eleanor walked around the table until she was standing right next to him. She leaned down, whispering in his ear. Do you remember last Christmas, Julian, when you told the catering staff not to serve me wine because the help shouldn't drink on the job? I remember. Now get out of my house. She turned to the door. Henderson. The doors opened, but it wasn't the old driver. It was a team of 4 large men in dark suits. Private security. Escort Mr. Sterling and Miss Sterling to their rooms to pack, Elena ordered. Ensure they do not take any estate property. Then, escort them off the premises. As the security guard stepped forward, Julian looked at Elena with pure hatred. This isn't over, Elena. You think you can run a multi-billion-dollar shipping empire? The board of directors will eat you alive. They'll never accept a secretary as chairman. You'll be bankrupt in a month. Elena smiled, a genuine, chilling smile. I guess we'll see on Monday, won't we? Monday morning in Seattle was grey and steel cold. The Sterling Maritime Tower rose 50 stories above the waterfront, a glass needle piercing the clouds. On the 50th floor, the boardroom was filled with tension. 12 men sat around the massive oval table. These were the old guard, men who had built their fortunes in the ruthless days of unregulated shipping. They were smoking cigars, despite the building's ban, and murmuring in low, angry tones. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne. He was the interim CEO, a man with a face like a bulldog and a reputation for crushing unions. He had been Julian's ally, mostly because Julian was easy to manipulate. This is a farce, Thorne grumbled, stubbing out his cigar. Arthur was senile, we all know it. We cannot let that woman walk in here and think she has a vote, let alone control. She holds 51% of the voting stock, Marcus, pointed out Simon Wells, the CFO, a nervous man who was constantly wiping his glasses. Legally, she is the company. Stock is one thing, Thorne spat. Power is another. We freeze her out. We vote of no confidence immediately. We bury her in litigation until she sells her shares to us for pennies on the dollar. She's a secretary, for God's sake. She probably doesn't know the difference between a TEU container and a cardboard box. The elevator doors at the end of the hall chimed. Here she comes, Thorne sneered. Let's make this quick. I have a lunch reservation. The double-glass doors to the boardroom didn't just open. They were pushed wide by 2 security guards. Elena walked in. She wasn't wearing the black of a widow. She was wearing a blood-red blazer over a black dress, sharp heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. She carried nothing but a thin tablet. She didn't look at the view of the harbour. She looked directly at Marcus Thorne. You're in my seat, Marcus, Elena said, stopping at the head of the table. Thorne didn't move. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Mrs. Sterling, we were just discussing the unfortunate clerical error regarding Arthur's will. We feel it would be best if you waited in the lobby while the adults discuss how to save this company from your husband's dementia." A few of the board members chuckled. Elena didn't blink. She placed her tablet on the table. "Arthur wasn't the one with dementia, Marcus. But you seem to be suffering from memory loss." "Excuse me?" Thorne bristled. "The Panama deal," Elena said softly. The room went quiet. The chuckles died instantly. "I beg your pardon?" Thorne sat up straighter. 3 years ago," Elena continued, her voice projecting clearly across the room, "Sterling Maritime was bidding for the exclusive rights to the new terminal in the Panama Canal. We lost the bid to a Chinese competitor. Arthur was devastated. He thought we were outbid." Elena tapped her tablet. A hologram projected onto the center of the table, a series of bank transfers and emails. "But we weren't outbid," Elena explained, walking slowly around the table, making eye contact with every man there. "Someone leaked our bid price to the competition 3 hours before the deadline, in exchange for a consulting fee of $2 million deposited into a shell account in the Cayman Islands." She stopped behind Marcus Thorne's chair. "The account belongs to a shell company called Thorne Logistics." Thorne's face drained of color. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "This is slander. I'll sue you." "I have the bank records, Marcus," Elena said calmly. "I found them 2 years ago, when Arthur asked me to organize his old files. I didn't tell him, because his heart was too weak to handle the betrayal of his best friend. But my heart is just fine." She looked at the security guards. "Escort Mr. Thorne out of the building. His employment is terminated for cause, effective immediately." "You can't do this!" Thorne screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. "I am the CEO." "Not anymore," Elena said. "Now get him out." As Thorne was dragged out, kicking and shouting threats, the silence in the room was absolute. The remaining 11 board members looked at Elena with a mixture of terror and newfound respect. Elena sat down at the head of the table. She looked at Simon Wells, the nervous CFO. "Simon," she said gently, "the Q3 reports showed a 4% dip in our Mediterranean routes due to fuel costs. I have a plan to reroute through North Africa to cut overhead by 6%. I've already drafted the contracts with the new suppliers. Pull them up on the screen." Simon scrambled to open his laptop, his hands shaking. Yes, Mrs. Sterling. Right away, Mrs. Sterling." Eleanor looked around the table. "Gentlemen, Arthur was a visionary, but he was too soft on you. I am not Arthur. We are going to double our profits in the next fiscal year, and we are going to do it by cutting the dead weight. Any objections?" No one spoke. No one dared. "Good," Elena smiled. "Let's get to work." 3 weeks later, Julian and Victoria were sitting in a dimly lit booth at a dive bar on the outskirts of Seattle. They looked ragged. Their credit cards had been frozen. They were staying in a cheap motel, a far cry from the manor. Across from them sat a man who looked like he smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne. His name was Vance, a private investigator who specialized in dirt. He was greasy, unethical, and exactly what they needed. "Tell me you have something," Julian said, gripping his beer. "We need to bury her, Vance. She's destroying us. She cut off my allowance. She's selling the Aspen house." Vance took a slow sip of his whiskey. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. He slid it across the sticky table. "You were right," Vance grunted. "She's not who she says she is." Victoria's eyes lit up. She ripped the envelope open. Inside were grainy black and white photos, photocopies of court documents, and a mugshot. "I knew it!" Victoria squealed. "Look at this! A mugshot!" Julian grabbed the photo. It was definitely Elena, but younger, maybe 20 years old. Her hair was wild, her eyes full of fear. The name on the booking slate didn't say Elena Sterling, or even her maiden name, Elena Rostova. It said Sofia Valenti. Sofia Valenti? Julian frowned. Who the hell is Sofia Valenti? I did some digging into the NYPD archives, Vance said, leaning in. 15 years ago, Sofia Valenti was the daughter of Marco Valenti. Does the name ring a bell? Julian shook his head. Marco Valenti was the bookkeeper for the Gambino crime family in New York, Vance whispered. He turned state's witness. He was going to testify against the Don. But before the trial, his car exploded. Marco and his wife were killed instantly. And the daughter? Julian asked, his heart racing. She vanished, Vance said. The police report says she was suspected of being involved. Complicit. They thought maybe she tipped off the hitmen to save her own skin. She was arrested for obstruction of justice, but the charges didn't stick. She disappeared into the system. Witness protection, maybe. Or maybe she just ran. Vance tapped a document. She changed her name to Elena Rostova, moved to Seattle, got a job as a secretary, buried her past. Victoria was trembling with excitement. She's a mobster's daughter. She was involved in a car bombing. Oh my God, Julian, this is it. This is the end of her. If we release this to the press, Julian calculated, the stock price of Sterling Maritime will crash. The board will have to remove her. You can't have the chairman of a multi-billion-dollar company linked to organized crime and murder. Better yet, Vance grinned, showing yellow teeth. If she lied on her marriage license about her identity, the marriage might be void. If the marriage is void, the will is invalid. Julian looked at the mug shot of the terrified young girl who became the Iron Lady of Sterling Maritime. A cruel smile spread across his face. We have her, Julian said. We're going to crash the company gala this Friday. We're going to put this mug shot on the big screen in front of the press, the investors, and the whole world. She won't just be fired, Victoria laughed. She'll be arrested. They paid Vance with the last of their cash, a roll of bills Julian had pawned his watch to get. As they walked out of the bar, the rain felt different. It didn't feel like gloom anymore. It felt like an opportunity. But they didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street. The window was cracked slightly open. Inside, a man with a telephoto lens lowered his camera. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Mrs. Sterling, the man said. They took the bait. Vance gave them the file. On the other end of the line, sitting in the high-backed leather chair in her penthouse office, Elena stared out at the city lights. Did they see the redacted pages? Elena asked. No, the man replied. Vance hid them, just as you instructed. They think you were the accomplice. Excellent, Elena said. Let them come to the gala. Let them think they have won. It will make the fall so much more entertaining. She hung up the phone and opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside lay a silver pistol and a faded, burnt photograph of a man holding a little girl. They have no idea who they are dealing with, she whispered to the empty room. The Sterling Maritime Annual Gala was the event of the Seattle social calendar. Held in the massive glass atrium of the company headquarters, it was a spectacle of wealth and power. Outside, the rain fell in sheets, but inside, under the towering glass ceiling, chandeliers dripped crystal, champagne flowed like water, and the city's elite mingled amidst towering ice sculptures carved in the shape of cargo ships. Elena moved through the crowd like a queen shark in a reef of smaller, frightened fish. She wore a gown of shimmering emerald silk that looked like liquid money, fitted perfectly to her frame. Her hair was up, revealing a diamond necklace that Arthur had given her, a piece Victoria had loudly claimed was too good for a secretary. The board members, now terrified of her after Marcus Thorne's public execution, bowed and scraped as she passed. Investors who had doubted her were now desperate to shake her hand, having seen the stock price jump 12% since she took over. At 9 p.m., the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center stage. Elena walked up to the microphone. The room hushed instantly. "Friends, investors, valued employees," Elena began, her voice confident and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous space. "Tonight we celebrate not just the legacy of Arthur Sterling, but the future. A future where we are stronger, leaner, and more honest than ever before." She paused, letting the words sink in. For too long, this company was bleeding from wounds inflicted by those who were supposed to protect it. But the bleeding has stopped. Suddenly there was a commotion near the main entrance. Security guards were shouting. The heavy velvet ropes were shoved aside. "Lies! It's all lies!" Julian's voice was shrill, cracking with desperation. He burst into the ballroom, followed closely by Victoria. They looked like wrecks. Julian's suit was rumpled, his eyes wild with lack of sleep and manic energy. Victoria's makeup was smeared, her hair frizzy from the damp air outside. They looked like ghosts crashing a feast. The crowd murmured. Cameras flashed, turning away from Eleanor and towards the spectacle. "Security, remove them," Eleanor said into the microphone, her voice calm, almost bored. "Wait!" Victoria screamed, rushing toward the stage. She held up the manila envelope Vance had given them, shaking it violently. "You don't want to remove us. Not until you see who your precious chairman really is." Julian scrambled up the steps onto the stage. He grabbed the microphone from Eleanor. She didn't fight him. She just stepped back, crossing her arms, a faint, icy smile on her lips. "Listen to me." Julian panted into the mic, sweat dripping down his forehead. "You think Elena Sterling is the savior of this company? She's a fraud. She's not even Elena Sterling." He signaled to the tech booth in the back of the room. "Put it up, now!" Julian had bribed the audiovisual technician with the last of his watch money. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the Sterling Maritime logo, flickered. A huge, grainy black and white mugshot appeared. The face was unmistakably younger, terrified Elena. Below it, the name Sofia Valenti. A gasp rippled through the hundreds of guests. "Behold!" Julian roared theatrically, pointing an accusing finger at Elena. "Her real name is Sofia Valenti. She is the daughter of Marco Valenti. Does that name ring a bell? The Gambino crime family bookkeeper." Victoria grabbed another microphone. "She's a mob princess. 15 years ago, her parents were killed in a car bombing meant to silence them before they could testify. The police suspected her. They thought she tipped off the hitmen to save herself. She's an accessory to murder." The room was in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Board members were clutching their pearls. The stock price was likely already plummeting in after-hours trading. Julian turned to Eleanor, his eyes gleaming with triumphant madness. "You lied on your marriage license. You used a false identity. That means your marriage to my father was null and void. You aren't his widow. You're nothing. The will is invalid. The company is mine." He looked out at the crowd, soaking in the shock. "She duped my father. She duped all of you. She's a criminal hiding in my mother's jewelry." Elena stood perfectly still under the spotlight. The emerald dress caught the light, making her look almost reptilian. She waited until Julian ran out of breath. She waited until the murmurs died down into a terrified silence, everyone waiting for her denial. Elena walked slowly back to Julian. She didn't grab the microphone. She just held out her hand. Julian, confused by her lack of fear, hesitated, then handed it to her. Elena looked at the massive mugshot of her terrified younger self on the screen. "You are right, Julian," Elena said softly into the microphone. The room froze. Victoria let out a squeak of disbelief. "That is me," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. "My name was Sofia Valenti. And yes, my father was Marco Valenti, a man who made terrible mistakes working for terrible people." She turned to face the crowd, her eyes burning with an intensity that silenced the room. "But you missed the most important part of the story, Julian. The part the private investigator I hired allowed you to find." The Sterling Maritime Annual Gala was not merely a party. It was a coronation. The event took place in the crystal atrium of the company's downtown headquarters, a soaring cathedral of glass and steel that looked out over the rain-swept Seattle harbor. Inside, the storm outside was forgotten, replaced by the soft hum of string quartets, the clink of baccarat crystal, and the murmur of 300 of the wealthiest people in the Pacific Northwest. Elena stood at the center of it all. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, structured and sharp, that moved around her like liquid armor. Around her neck hung the Star of the Sound, a diamond pendant Arthur had commissioned for their 5th anniversary. For years, Victoria had sneered at it, claiming it looked ridiculous on a secretary's neck. Tonight, it looked like it belonged to royalty. Elena held a flute of vintage champagne, but she didn't drink. Her eyes were scanning the room, sharp and predatory. She saw the board of directors, the same men who had tried to oust her 3 weeks ago, now fawning over her near the ice sculpture. She saw the bankers who had frozen the company's credit lines, now desperate to buy her a drink. "You look like a woman who has already won the war," a deep voice rumbled beside her. It was Alistair Blackwood. The lawyer stood, holding a sparkling water, his silver eyes twinkling with rare amusement. "The war isn't over, Alistair," Elena replied, her voice low so the nearby senator wouldn't hear. "The rats are cornered. That is when they bite the hardest." "Do you think they will come?" Blackwood asked. "I know they will," Elena said, her gaze drifting toward the heavy bronze doors at the far end of the atrium. "Desperation makes people stupid, and Julian has been stupid his entire life." As if on cue, the lights in the massive hall dimmed. The chatter died down. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the center stage. Elena handed her glass to a passing waiter and ascended the stairs. The silence was absolute. She adjusted the microphone, the sound echoing slightly in the vast space. "Distinguished guests, loyal employees and friends of Arthur," Elena began. Her voice was steady, projecting a calm authority that she had forged in the fires of the last month. "Tonight we celebrate a record quarter, but more importantly, we celebrate a return to integrity." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. Integrity. "For too long, Sterling Maritime was piloted by ghosts," she continued. "We were weighed down by secrets, by excess, by people who viewed this company not as a legacy to build, but as a piggy bank to smash." Suddenly, a loud boom echoed from the back of the hall. It wasn't thunder, it was the sound of the heavy bronze doors being thrown open with violent force. A collective gasp ripped through the room. Heads turned. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly, a cello screeching as the bow slipped. Standing in the doorway, framed by the pouring rain and the flashing lightning outside, were Julian and Victoria Sterling. They looked like wraiths. Julian, once the picture of GQ elegance, was unraveled. His expensive suit was soaked through, his tie undone, his hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes were wide, manic, rimmed with red. Beside him, Victoria was shivering, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face, clutching a sodden manila envelope to her chest like a lifeline. Security guards moved to intercept them, but Julian shoved past them with the hysterical strength of a man with nothing left to lose. "Don't touch me!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking. "You work for me. You all work for me." He stormed into the room, leaving muddy footprints on the pristine marble floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, recoiling from his madness. "Turn off that microphone," Julian bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at Elena on the stage. "Stop the lies! Stop the show!" Elena didn't move. She didn't signal the security team. She simply watched him come, her face a mask of bored indifference. "Julian," Elena said, her voice amplified by the speakers, calm and condescending, "you are not on the guest list, and you are ruining the carpet." "The carpet?" Julian laughed, a high-pitched, jagged sound that made the guests uncomfortable. "You care about the carpet? You're about to lose everything, Elena. Or should I say, Sophia?" The name landed like a grenade. Victoria scrambled up the stairs, tripping on her wet hem, and grabbed the secondary microphone. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "She's a fraud!" Victoria shrieked. "She's not Elena Sterling. She's not Elena Rostova. She is a criminal. A murderer." The room erupted into murmurs. Phones were raised, recording the spectacle. This was the scandal of the decade, unfolding live. Julian reached the tech booth at the side of the stage. He shoved the terrified technician aside and jammed a USB drive into the console. "Look!" Julian roared, gesturing to the massive 40-foot projection screen behind Elena. "Look at your queen!" The screen, which had been displaying the company logo, flickered and changed. A colossal image appeared. It was grainy, black and white, and undeniably real. It was a mugshot. The woman in the photo was younger, barely 20, with wild hair and eyes filled with terror, holding a slate with a booking number. Beneath the face was the name, Sophia Valenti. The gasp from the audience was deafening. The board members looked at each other in panic. A murmur of, "Is that her?" and "Oh my God," rippled through the room. "Behold!" Julian screamed, pacing the stage like a revivalist preacher. "Sophia Valenti, the daughter of Marco Valenti. Does that name sound familiar to anyone who reads the crime blotters?" He turned to the crowd, soaking in their shock. Marco Valenti was the accountant for the Gambino crime family. He washed blood money for the mob. And his daughter? She was his accomplice. Victoria jumped in, her voice trembling with excitement. 15 years ago, Marco Valenti and his wife were killed in a car bombing in New York. The police suspected her. They believed she tipped off the hitmen to save her own skin. She sold out her own parents to the mob. "She's a monster!" Julian yelled, turning on Elena. He was inches from her face now, spitting as he spoke. "You are a fugitive. You lied on your marriage license. You used a fake name. That means your marriage to my father is void. The will is invalid. You are nothing but a squatter in my house." Julian spun around to face the stunned crowd. "I have called the police. They are on their way right now to arrest this gangster. Sterling Maritime belongs to the family. It belongs to us." The silence that followed was suffocating. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on Elena. They were judging her. They were rewriting their history of her. The secretary label was gone, replaced by mobster. Elena looked at the mugshot of her younger self. She looked at the terror in those eyes. She remembered that day. She remembered the smell of the ink on her fingers. She remembered the feeling of being utterly alone in the universe. She slowly turned her gaze to Julian. He was panting, grinning, certain of his victory. He thought he had stripped her naked in front of the world. Elena stepped forward. She didn't attack him. She didn't shout. She walked past him to the podium. She gripped the sides of the lectern, her knuckles white, not from fear, but from the sheer force of the truth she was about to unleash. "You are right, Julian," Elena said softly. The microphone picked up the whisper. The room froze. Julian's grin widened. "I am Sofia Valenti," Elena confessed, her voice gaining strength, resonating through the hall. "And yes, my father was Marco Valenti. He was a weak man who made terrible choices. He worked for monsters." She looked out at the crowd, meeting their eyes, refusing to look away. "But your investigator missed the most important part of the file, Julian, the part that is sealed by the federal government." Julian frowned. "What? What are you talking about? You're a criminal." "I was 20 years old," Elena said, her voice cutting through his interruption. "My father decided to turn state's evidence. He was going to testify against the Don. We were in the witness protection program. We were supposed to be safe." She paused, closing her eyes for a brief second, allowing the memory to surface. "It was a Tuesday, just like the day we buried Arthur. It was raining. The room was deathly quiet. Even the servers had stopped moving. We were in a safe house in Queens," Elena narrated, her voice trembling with a raw emotion that no actor could fake. "My mother realized she had left her purse in the car. She asked me to get it. I was walking toward the driveway. I was 10 feet away when the car exploded." She opened her eyes. They were wet, but fierce. "I didn't tip off the killers, Julian," she whispered, the sound amplified to a roar in the silence. "I watched my parents burn. I was the target who survived." The horror in the room was palpable. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. The judgment in the air evaporated, replaced by a wave of sickening sympathy. Elena pointed a steady hand at the massive mugshot behind her. "That photo was taken by the US Marshals an hour after the explosion. I wasn't being booked for murder. I was being processed into deep cover protection because the people who killed my parents were still hunting me." Elena Rostova wasn't a fake name to commit fraud. It was a shield given to me by the United States Department of Justice to keep me alive. She turned slowly to Julian. His face had gone pale. The triumph was leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. But Vance said," Julian stammered. "Vance found what I allowed him to find," Elena said coldly. "I knew you hired him. I knew you were digging. So I let you find the old ghost." She took a step toward him. "When I met Arthur, I told him everything. He didn't marry a stranger. He used his resources, his lawyers, and his power to ensure that the threat against me was finally neutralized. He gave me my life back. He didn't marry a fraud, Julian. He married a survivor." Victoria dropped the manila envelope. It hit the floor with a wet slap. "No, that's not true." "You wanted to talk about criminals, Julian?" Elena asked, her voice turning hard as diamond. "You wanted to talk about the mob? Let's talk about them." Elena reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out a small, silver flash drive. She held it up for the cameras. "Arthur didn't write you out of his will because you were lazy," Elena said. "He didn't cut you off because you were annoying. He cut you off because you were dangerous." She nodded to the tech booth. "Play it." The mugshot of Sofia Valenti vanished. The screen went black for a second, and then a chaotic spiderweb of documents appeared. Bank transfers, emails, chat logs. 5 years ago, Elena explained, walking the stage like a prosecutor. Sterling Maritime faced a liquidity crisis. Arthur told the board it was the market. He lied to protect his name. The truth was that $50 million had been embezzled from the company accounts. She pointed to a highlighted name on a bank transfer document displayed on the screen. Beneficiary, Ivan Korzak. "Does that name ring a bell, Julian?" Elena asked. Julian was shaking his head violently, backing away. "Stop it! Turn it off!" "Ivan Korzak is a lieutenant in the Russian Bratva," Elena declared, her voice ringing with judgment. The same organization that absorbed the remnants of the family that killed my parents. The crowd gasped again, this time with genuine fear. You had a gambling problem, Julian, Elena continued mercilessly. You lost millions you didn't have, and when the bookies came to collect, you didn't pay them with your money. You stole from your father. You stole from this company. You funded the very people who murder innocents. Elena turned to Victoria. And you, Victoria. The emails on the screen now, those are yours. You falsified the ledgers to hide Julian's theft. You laundered the money through the Sterling Charity Foundation. That is 50 counts of wire fraud. That is 20 years in federal prison. Victoria's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the stage, sobbing into her hands. Julian looked around wildly. He looked at the board members who were staring at him with pure hatred. He looked at the investors. He looked at the exits. But the exits were blocked. The doors opened again. But it wasn't the police Julian had called. It was the FBI. A dozen agents in windbreakers marked Federal Agent marched into the room, shaking the rain from their jackets. They weren't looking at Elena. Julian Sterling, Victoria Sterling, the lead agent shouted. You are under arrest for embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Julian stumbled back, bumping into the podium. He looked at Elena one last time. He looked for a shred of mercy in her eyes. He found none. You tried to destroy me with my past, Elena said to him, her voice low, just for him. But you forgot one thing, Julian. I grew up in a war zone. You grew up in a country club. You never stood a chance. The agents swarmed the stage. They handcuffed Julian, forcing his arms behind his back. He was crying now, ugly, sobbing tears. They hoisted Victoria up, who was screaming for her father, a father she had disrespected until the day he died. As they were dragged out of the crystal atrium, the flashbulbs went off like strobe lights, capturing their ruin for the morning papers. Elena stood alone on the stage. The screen behind her went dark. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't tense anymore. It was reverent. She smoothed the front of her emerald dress. She took a deep breath, exhaling the ghost of Sophia Valenti, exhaling the fear she had carried for 15 years. She walked back to the microphone. I apologize for the interruption, Elena said, her voice composing itself back into the cool, elegant tone of the chairman. As I was saying, we are clearing out the rot. We are building a future based on truth. She picked up her champagne glass from the podium where she had left it. She raised it high. To Arthur, she said, the only man who really knew me. There was a beat of hesitation, and then, slowly, a thunderous applause began. It started with Mr. Blackwood, then the board, and then the entire room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of respect. They raised their glasses. To Arthur, to Elena. Elena took a sip of the champagne. It was cold, crisp, and tasted like absolute power. She looked out at the rain hitting the glass roof. The storm was still raging outside, but in here she was untouchable. The ignored wife was gone. The Queen had ascended. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you checkmate your enemies. Elena didn't just survive, she rewrote the game. She let Julian and Victoria dig their own graves with the very shovel they brought to bury her. It turns out, the invisible woman had the clearest vision of them all. I have to ask you guys, was that final twist satisfying? Do you think Julian and Victoria deserved the FBI raid, or was the public humiliation enough? I personally think the Russian mob debt reveal was the perfect karma for two people who judged Elena for her past. Let me know your theories in the comments. What do you think Elena did with the company next? Did she sell it, or did she build an empire? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It tells YouTube that you love this kind of drama. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We have a crazy revenge story involving a cheating fiancé and a lottery ticket coming up next week that you do not want to miss. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you ignore. They might just be the one running the show.